So for book review number two, I bought the audiobook and then I followed along with an electronic copy on Libby of The Bomber Mafia by Malcolm Gladwell, and I listened to it all the way through. Um, he is a Canadian journalist that moved to the United States for a job. He moved to Indiana, and he's just like a nonfiction writer. And so his story is about how during World War II they transitioned to fighting with planes instead of like one-on-one combat like we've experienced in past wars. So it was published on April 27th, 2021. So it is a newer book. And this whole book is pretty much following two generals in the Air Force, or at the time it was the Army Air Corps, and it's talking about how the Air Corps wanted as far away from the Army as they could get, so they found a old cotton plantation in Montgomery, Alabama called Maxwell Airfield that they turned into their own space where they could train all of these men to fight in planes versus just one-on-one combat. So as it follows, the main guy is Curtis LeMay. He was a Air Force general, and Haywood Hansel is the other general that it follows. So Haywood Hansel was trained at Maxwell Air Force Base, and he goes out to fight with the British Royal Air Force. And so they decide that they are fed up with World War II and they want to end it, so they want to just cause as much mass destruction as they can. And they give this order to Hansel to execute, and he can't do it. So they basically call him a weenie and kick him out, and so they bring in Curtis LeMay. And so General LeMay has often throughout the book, he goes and compares him to when Jesus was tempted by the devil, that he was more of, if Jesus would have just said, absolutely, I will accept everything that you say that I can have and go on about my business, that's what they compare him to. So it follows, like, they develop the napalm bomb because they want to cause as much destruction as they can. And so they want to hurry up and get the Japanese to surrender to end World War II. So they develop this napalm bomb that is basically gasoline and this gel. And when it hits and explodes, this gel goes everywhere and it catches anything on fire. So they understood that in Japan at the time, there were not many like brick and mortar buildings, that they were more like wood, straw kind of built structures. So they send Curtis LeMay to figure out how to get these big bombing planes over there to basically destroy Japan. So they find these little strip of islands and they build a runway strip, and they have to go over the Himalayas into Japan to bomb their land. So they are, like, basically the story is following how he makes his decisions to do it and all the destruction that they cause towards the end. I'm pretty sure that towards the end of the story it says that some of the cities that they targeted, they burned up to 80% of the town down. But I mean, like, I'm pretty sure that the least that it said was like 40-something%. So they were causing huge destruction in these Japanese cities, just trying to pound them to death to get them to surrender. And then they follow it up with the atomic bombs, and then they continue with these napalm bombings to try to just really send the message home that, hey, we are done, you better be done too. So that's pretty much the summary of the book, and it's just following these generals around, trying to understand how World War II, they wanted them to fight in planes and not lose as many people as when they were like fighting one-to-one combat and in the trenches and things like that. So I personally did not really enjoy the book. I feel like it would have been much better as a documentary, because as it follows through the audiobook, if he ever quoted someone or a general, he had an audio recording of the person to follow up. So I think it would have been a lot neater to be able to see and follow up with these recordings like in a documentary, because to me the book was basically a documentary script typed out into a book. And so it wasn't like something that you could really just get into, because there wasn't like main characters that you could follow, and it really didn't go into like the personalities of these men very much. It did a little bit when it was comparing them to like the devil, and when it called Hansel, saying that he wasn't man enough to execute these orders. But other than that, it's not really something that you can really just get into. So if I had to do it over again, I would have chosen a different book. But to be able to turn it into a lesson plan, I really liked the 6th grade standard that said identify changes on the home front during World War II, because it does talk about how when they were considering where to bomb in Germany, they were talking about focusing on their power grids, on the aqueducts, things like that, like their major buildings, so that it basically brought the cities in on themselves where they couldn't sustain themselves, so they were having to surrender to not cause like mass killings of their citizens that were just like a effect of the war, instead of, you know, people out fighting in actual battles. So it was talking about how they were considering from the United States standpoint, how can we redesign our infrastructures, because if we have this idea, then they probably do too, and we need to protect ourselves. And it specifically talked about like the aqueducts and the power grid in New York City. And it also talked about how to be able to build the planes, there was a ball bearing that was being made by this one company, and it was flooded. And so it put this entire line of building planes for this Air Force base in Montgomery on halt. So it was talking about how they needed to focus on destroying their manufacturing buildings, and if this one company being flooded could stop the United States from having all of these planes, then what's to stop them from doing this to another country? So it's talking about how they were having to reconsider the entire infrastructure of the United States during the war based on their experiences and what they wanted them to experience.